In just 39 seconds, one of Hollywood's most respected actors completely lost it on late-night television. Samuel L. Jackson, the man who's never been afraid to speak his mind, found himself in a screaming match with Seth Meyers that ended with him walking off the stage in disgust. What started as a conversation about Jackson's latest film turned into one of the ugliest confrontations we've ever seen on television. Meyers pushed too far. Jackson pushed back harder. And what happened next left the entire studio audience in shock. Before we get into this absolute disaster of an interview, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the moments they don't want you to see, and the confrontations that reveal who these people really are behind the cameras. Last night on Late Night with Seth Meyers, something happened that nobody saw coming. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto that stage like he always does, with confidence, wearing a sharp black suit and his signature style. The audience was excited, cheering loudly as he sat down across from Meyers. Jackson had just finished filming his newest action movie, and everyone expected this to be a fun conversation about explosions, stunts, and maybe some funny stories from the set. But within the first few minutes, you could feel something was off. Meyers started the interview normally enough, asking Jackson about the physical demands of doing action movies at his age. It seemed like a simple question, but the way Meyers phrased it made Jackson pause. He tilted his head slightly and gave Meyers a look that anyone who knows Jackson would recognize as a warning sign. "At my age?" Jackson repeated, his voice carrying a slight edge. "What exactly do you mean by that, Seth?" Meyers laughed it off nervously, trying to backtrack. No, I just meant that doing stunts and action sequences is tough work for anyone, you know? It's physically demanding." Jackson didn't laugh. He sat back in his chair, studying Meyers with an intensity that made the host shift uncomfortably. "Right, sure, that's what you meant." The audience sensed the tension immediately. The energy in the room changed. Meyers tried to move forward, pivoting to ask about Jackson's co-stars in the film, but Jackson wasn't letting it go that easily. He answered the questions, but his responses were shorter, more clipped. He wasn't giving Meyers the warm, funny Samuel L. Jackson that audiences love. He was giving him the cold, calculating version. Then, Meyers made his second mistake. He brought up Jackson's earlier work, specifically his role in a film from the 1990 seconds, where Jackson played a character that some critics at the time had called stereotypical. Meyers framed it as a question about how Hollywood has evolved, but the way he worded it came across as judgmental. "When you look back at some of those earlier roles, do you ever think about how they might be perceived differently today?" Meyers asked, leaning forward with what he probably thought was an intellectual expression. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Perceived differently by who? By you?" "No, I mean by audiences, by society. We're more aware now of certain representations and stereotypes." "Stereotypes," Jackson repeated flatly. "You're sitting here telling me that my work, roles that I chose, roles that I brought depth and humanity to, were stereotypes." Meyers started to stumble over his words. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the industry has changed, and we view things through a different lens now." "We?" Jackson leaned forward now, his famous intensity fully activated. "Who is we, Seth? You got a mouse in your pocket?" Some people in the audience laughed nervously, but most stayed quiet. You could feel how uncomfortable everyone was becoming. Meyers tried to laugh it off, but his laugh sounded fake and forced. "I'm just trying to have a conversation about the evolution of representation in Hollywood," Meyers said, his voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. "No, you're sitting here questioning my choices as a black actor in an industry that's been racist as hell for decades," Jackson said, his voice rising slightly. "You're acting like I need to apologize for working, for taking roles, for building a career in a system that wasn't built for people who look like me." The audience was dead silent now. Meyers' face had gone red. He glanced toward his producers off stage, clearly looking for help, but this was his mess to deal with. "Samuel, I think you're misunderstanding me," Meyers tried to say, but Jackson cut him off. "No, I understand you perfectly. You think you can sit here with your late-night talk show and your safe little questions and analyze my career like you have any idea what it was like to be a black actor trying to make it in the 90s. You want to talk about stereotypes? Let's talk about the stereotype of white liberals who think they get to decide what's acceptable for black artists. Meyers' mouth opened and closed like a fish. He clearly hadn't expected Jackson to come at him this hard. I'm not trying to decide anything. I'm asking questions. You're asking the wrong damn questions, Jackson shot back. And you're asking them in a way that's disrespectful. Meyers tried to regain control of the interview. He took a breath and attempted to switch topics entirely, asking about Jackson's upcoming projects. But the damage was done. Jackson answered with one-word responses. His body language closed off, his expression making it clear he was done playing along. That's when Meyers made his biggest mistake of the night. In what seemed like an attempt to lighten the mood, he made a joke. A really, really bad joke. He said something about hoping Jackson's character in the new movie didn't have to use the same angry voice he was using right now. The studio went completely silent. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, suffocating. Jackson stared at Meyers for what felt like an eternity. His expression didn't change, but you could see the fury building behind his eyes. The angry voice? Jackson said slowly, each word deliberate. So now I'm the angry black man because I called you out on your bullshit. No, that's not what I meant at all, Meyers said quickly, panic creeping into his voice. It was a joke. A bad joke. I apologize. You're damn right it was a bad joke, Jackson said, his voice getting louder. You know what? I've been doing this for too long to sit here and take this kind of disrespect. You bring me on your show. You question my career choices. You act like I owe you some kind of explanation for how I survived in Hollywood. And then, when I stand up for myself, you call me angry? Meyers tried to interrupt, tried to apologize again, but Jackson wasn't having it. He stood up from his chair, and the audience gasped. Nobody expected him to actually get up. Where are you going? Meyers asked, standing up as well, his voice cracking slightly. Samuel, please sit down. Let's talk about this. Talk about what? How you think it's okay to patronize me on national television? How you think you can make jokes about me being angry when you're the one who's been disrespectful this entire interview? Jackson pulled off his microphone and tossed it onto the chair he'd been sitting in. I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be your token black guest that you get to psychoanalyze. The audience didn't know whether to react or stay silent. Some people were pulling out their phones, recording what was happening. Meyers looked absolutely devastated, his face pale, sweat visible on his forehead under the studio lights. Samuel, please, I never meant any disrespect, Meyers pleaded, taking a step toward Jackson. This is a huge misunderstanding. Jackson turned back to face him, and the look on his face was pure contempt. No, Seth. This is exactly what it looks like. You got too comfortable. You thought you could talk to me any kind of way because we're on your show, on your stage, playing by your rules. But I don't play that game. I was trying to have a meaningful conversation about important issues, Meyers tried to explain, his hands gesturing desperately. No, you were trying to sound smart and woke by questioning a black man's career while sitting in your privileged position, Jackson corrected him. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't see that difference is exactly the problem. Meyers looked around helplessly. His band didn't know what to do. The audience was frozen. His producers were probably screaming into his earpiece, but there was no saving this. I'm sorry you feel that way, Meyers said, which was possibly the worst thing he could have said. Jackson let out a harsh laugh. You're sorry I feel that way? Not sorry for what you said? Not sorry for how you conducted this interview? You're sorry about my feelings? That's not what I meant, Meyers stammered. You know what, Seth? It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what you said and how you said it. And what you did tonight was disrespectful as hell. Jackson started walking toward the exit of the stage. I've been in this business for decades. I've dealt with real racism, with people who didn't hide behind liberal talking points. And somehow, you managed to be more insulting than half of them. Meyers followed him a few steps. Please, don't leave like this. We can fix this. Jackson stopped and turned around one more time. The cameras caught his face perfectly, and the anger there was unmistakable. Fix it? You can't fix it, man. You can't fix ignorance with a commercial break. You want to know what you can do? You can think real hard about how you talk to your guests, especially your black guests. Think about whether you're treating them with the same respect you'd show anyone else. Because tonight, you failed that test. I treat all my guests with respect, Meyers protested weakly. Do you? Jackson challenged him. Because I've watched your show, Seth. I've seen how you interview white actors, white directors, white musicians. You don't question their career choices. You don't bring up controversial roles from 30 years ago and ask them to justify their decisions. You don't make jokes about them being angry when they disagree with you. Meyers had no response to that. He stood there, looking small despite being on his own stage, in his own show. His silence spoke volumes. That's what I thought, Jackson said. Maybe take some time and really think about that. Think about why you felt comfortable talking to me the way you did tonight. Think about what that says about you. A producer came out from backstage, trying to de-escalate the situation, but Jackson waved them off. I'm done here. I don't need an escort. I know how to find the exit. The audience still wasn't sure if they should applaud or stay quiet. A few people started clapping, supporting Jackson, but it died out quickly when they realized this wasn't a planned bit. This was real. This was uncomfortable. This was the kind of moment that people would be talking about for weeks. Meyers made one last desperate attempt. Samuel, I have nothing but respect for you and your work. I'm genuinely sorry if anything I said came across differently than intended. Jackson paused at the edge of the stage, his hand on the curtain. If it came across differently? Seth, there's no if. It did come across as disrespectful. Because it was disrespectful. And the fact that you're still using words like if tells me you still don't get it. Help me understand then, Meyers said. And there might have been genuine pleading in his voice. I want to understand. It's not my job to educate you, Jackson said firmly. I'm not here to teach you how to not be offensive. I'm not your teacher. I'm not your lesson. I'm a guest who came on your show to promote a movie, and instead, I got interrogated about my past and mocked for defending myself. That's what you need to understand. With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the stage, leaving Seth Meyers standing alone under the lights. The band didn't play. The audience didn't know what to do. Meyers stood there for a moment, clearly in shock, before finally turning to the camera. We're going to take a break, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll be right back. But everyone watching knew they wouldn't be coming back from this. The damage was done. The conversation that should have been simple and fun had turned into a masterclass in how not to interview someone, especially someone from a different background than your own. Meyers had crossed lines he didn't even seem to know existed, and Jackson had called him out on every single one of them. As the show cut to commercial, cameras caught Jackson walking through the backstage area, still visibly angry, staff members clearing out of his way. He didn't look back. He didn't pause. He walked straight out of that building with his head held high, leaving behind one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. The entire confrontation, from the first awkward question to Jackson's final exit, had lasted less than 20 minutes. But in those 20 minutes, television audiences witnessed something raw and real. They saw what happens when someone pushes back against subtle disrespect. They saw what happens when a man who spent his entire career fighting for respect decides he's not going to tolerate even the smallest slight. Seth Meyers had invited Samuel L. Jackson onto his show, expecting a fun, promotional interview. What he got instead was a harsh lesson in respect, representation, and the weight of words. Jackson had given him chance after chance to correct course, to acknowledge the problems with his questions, to show genuine understanding. But Meyers had failed every single test, digging himself deeper with each attempt to explain or justify his approach. The audience in the studio sat in stunned silence even after the cameras stopped rolling. Some people were on their phones immediately, already tweeting about what they'd just witnessed. Others sat there trying to process what had happened. The band members looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The producers were undoubtedly in full crisis mode backstage, but Samuel L. Jackson was gone. He'd walked out of that studio, out of that building, and away from an interview that had gone catastrophically wrong. He'd stood up for himself, called out behavior that he found unacceptable, and refused to play along just to make everyone comfortable. And in doing so, he'd created a moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and discussed for a very long time. Meyers remained on stage, his confidence completely shattered. The man who usually commanded that space with humor and charm, looked lost. His team tried to talk to him, probably trying to figure out how to handle the rest of the show, but the energy was gone. The night was over, even if they still had segments left to film. What had started as another night of late-night television had become something else entirely. It had become a statement about respect, about the subtle ways people can be disrespectful without even realizing it, and about what happens when someone refuses to accept that treatment. Jackson hadn't yelled for the sake of yelling. He hadn't stormed off for dramatic effect. He'd made a calculated decision that his dignity and self-respect were more important than playing nice for the cameras. The studio audience finally started to file out, buzzing with conversation. Everyone had an opinion about what they'd just seen. Some people defended Meyers, saying he'd just been trying to ask thoughtful questions. Others sided completely with Jackson, saying the disrespect had been obvious from the start. But regardless of which side people fell on, everyone agreed on one thing: this was going to be huge. Staff members scrambled to figure out what to do with the rest of the show. Would they even air this? Could they edit it? Should they address it directly, or pretend it didn't happen? These were questions being shouted in production meetings even as the studio cleared out. Meanwhile, Samuel L. Jackson was already in his car, driving away from the studio. He'd done what he came to do, in a way. He'd shown up. He'd been professional. And when that professionalism wasn't returned, he'd drawn a line and walked away. He hadn't caused a scene for attention. He'd defended himself because it was necessary. The stage sat empty now. Lights still on. Meyers' desk still in place. The chair where Jackson had been sitting just minutes ago now vacant. It looked like any other talk show set, but what had happened there tonight was anything but ordinary. It was real. It was raw. It was uncomfortable. And it was necessary, because sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that make people uncomfortable. Sometimes growth only happens when someone is willing to call out behavior that's wrong, even when it's subtle, even when it's unintentional, even when it's on live television in front of millions of people. Samuel L. Jackson had done exactly that. He'd walked onto that stage as a guest. He'd walked off as a man who refused to be disrespected. And in between, he'd given everyone watching a masterclass in standing up for yourself, no matter who's asking the questions or how bright the lights are. The night ended not with laughter or applause, but with an empty stage and a lot of very difficult questions that Late Night with Seth Meyers was going to have to answer. Questions about respect, about how guests are treated, about unconscious bias, about the difference between asking tough questions and being disrespectful. But those were questions for later. In the moment, all anyone could talk about was what they'd just witnessed. The interview that had exploded into confrontation. The host who'd lost control of his own show. The guest who'd walked away rather than accept treatment he found unacceptable. It was messy. It was uncomfortable. It was real. And it was over. Ending with Samuel L. Jackson's final words hanging in the air, and his empty chair sitting under the bright studio lights as a reminder of what had just happened.